Imagine a world burning under siege, its people abandoned by every ally, its skies darkened by enemy warships. Hope is gone, until a desperate signal is sent into the void, and someone answers. But not just anyone. A silent force, long underestimated, rises from the shadows. Not for glory, not for conquest, but because they remember what it means to be forgotten. This is the moment humanity reveals who they really are, and the galaxy will never be the same. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The sky over Kalis was no longer blue. What had once been a brilliant, cloud-dappled heaven was now smeared with smoke and fire. Ash rained softly on the capital's glass rooftops, many of which now lay shattered across the streets like broken dreams. The skyline that once gleamed with silver towers and graceful curves had become a ruin of melted steel and fractured crystal. Above the battered planet, the dark silhouettes of Zerain warships hung low, like vultures circling a dying creature. The invasion had lasted only 3 weeks, but it had left the world unrecognizable. In the depths of an underground command bunker, Chancellor Malin Darrow stood in silence. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, his shoulders stiff with exhaustion. He hadn't slept in days. Around him, the flickering glow of tactical displays lit up anxious faces. Officers, ministers, engineers, and aides, all clinging to some thread of hope. But that thread was wearing thin. The last report from the front line was grim. Kalis's defense fleet was gone, its remnants scattered across the outer moons. The ground resistance was reduced to scattered holdouts, using hand weapons against mechs and plasma tanks. First Advisor Seelan Vorn approached Malin with quiet urgency. "Evacuation transports have space," he said, "but less than a third of our people are willing to leave." Malin wasn't surprised. The Kalisians were bound to their ancestral cities. Their sense of identity came not only from shared history but from a biological connection to the land. Neural bonding, a quirk of their evolution, made separation from their homeland painful, sometimes even fatal. To many, exile meant a kind of death no less tragic than the one brought by orbital fire. Seelan's voice lowered. "The sanctuary planets have stopped responding. Even if we got everyone off-world, I doubt anyone would take us in." Malin nodded slowly. Their so-called allies, the same empires and republics that had once traded culture, goods, and promises, had turned away. One by one, they had bowed to the Zerain Empire's threats, choosing silence over sacrifice. Kalis had become a symbol of hopeless resistance, and now they were alone. "We've tried every option," said Commander Isla Tross from across the room. "No neutral power will risk war. The Zerain are too strong. No one dares stand against them." Silence followed. It wasn't the quiet of agreement, it was the stillness of finality. There were no moves left on the board, nothing but the end. Then, from the communication console, a voice broke through. "There may be one more." All eyes turned to Riva Solon, a newly appointed junior member of the council. She looked out of place among the hardened leaders. Young, barely past academy age, she stood awkwardly, clutching a tablet with trembling fingers. Malin raised an eyebrow. "Speak freely." Riva hesitated, then said the word that would change everything. "Humans." A few people blinked. Others scoffed softly. Humanity? The species that had joined the galactic community only 30 years ago. They had no alliances, no known treaties. Their technology was considered primitive by most standards. Their politics were mysterious, and their culture rarely shared. Earth had become a ghost among the stars, seen but barely heard. "They don't owe us anything," Seelan said. "They might not even respond." "They've never sided with the Zerain," Riva replied. "They've never sided with anyone, and that means they haven't said no." It was a flimsy hope, but hope, however fragile, was more than they'd had a moment before. Malin stared at the cracked map of Kalis on the display. Fire, smoke, red warning lights blinking like dying stars. He nodded. Send the message. The command center moved into motion. Gone were the formal phrases of diplomacy. This time the message was simple, honest, and desperate. No titles, no pleas for alliance, just the truth. To the people and leadership of Earth. We are Calesians. Our world is under siege. The Zorain Empire is exterminating us. We have no allies left. If you can help in any way, we ask only this. Respond. This may be our final transmission. The message was launched across every available frequency. It echoed into deep space, past the ruins of satellites, past the grasp of the Zorain fleet. The chance of it reaching Earth was slim. The chance of a reply was even smaller. Hours passed. The bunker shook again and again as the bombardments intensified. Lights flickered, systems failed. People wept quietly in corners, holding each other. Some prepared for death. Others simply stared at the ceiling, waiting for the final collapse. Then, a sharp sound. A chirp from the comms console. Chancellor, the technician whispered, eyes wide. We're receiving a signal. Malin moved closer. His voice cracked. From whom? The technician's voice trembled. From Earth. Gasps echoed through the room. Seelan stumbled back a step. Even Riva's eyes widened with disbelief. Put it through, Malin said. The screen flickered to life. A human face appeared, calm, focused, unreadable. I am Admiral. Naya Thorne of the Earth Peacekeeping Fleet, the woman said. We have received your distress call. We are verifying your situation. Help is coming. Please transmit all enemy fleet coordinates and defensive information immediately. Throughout, screen went black. The room was silent. Malin's lips moved slowly. They're coming? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For the first time in weeks, in a bunker buried beneath a dying world, the people of Kalis dared to believe the impossible. They dared to believe they might survive. The moment Admiral Naya Thorne's face disappeared from the Yao, screen silence filled the Calesian command bunker. No one knew what to say. After so many days of death, fire, and unanswered cries for help, the simple message from Earth seemed unreal. Could it be a trick? A delay tactic? Or worse, false hope? The idea that someone, anyone, was coming to help felt almost too good to be true. Chancellor Malin stood still, his eyes locked on the now dark screen, as if staring hard enough would bring the human woman back. Around him, advisors whispered, questioned, doubted. Commander Ayla Tross crossed her arms tightly, her face hard. We don't even know what their capabilities are. They've kept themselves distant for decades. What if they're not strong enough? What if this is just a gesture? Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much destruction to easily believe in salvation. Riva Solon, the youngest voice in the room, and the one who had dared to mention Earth in the first place, looked uncertain now. She hadn't expected a response, none of them had. Yet the humans hadn't asked what was in it for them. They hadn't asked for favors, alliances, or guarantees. They had simply said, help is coming. As ordered, the communications team transmitted every piece of tactical data they had. Enemy ship locations, defense grid statuses, surviving resistance groups. It felt like opening the last chapter of a dying story. Most of the Calesians still believed it would end the same way, with ash and silence. But even disbelief couldn't stop the ripple of something new spreading through the bunker. A small, cautious spark of hope. Outside, the Zorain fleet continued its attack. Explosions shook the earth, each tremor loosening ceilings and nerves alike. The sky remained dark with smoke and enemy ships. Civilians huddled in shelters, wounded filled makeshift hospitals, and engineers worked around the clock to keep power flowing in the capital's last surviving districts. Hours passed. No human ships appeared. No second message arrived. For some, the waiting was worse than the bombardment. It could have been a trick, someone whispered. A computer error, a recording from the past. But Malin shook his head. That wasn't a recording, he said quietly. That was a soldier. A real one. The truth was, nobody on Kalis really understood Earth. The humans had burst onto the galactic scene 30 years ago after discovering faster-than-light travel. But they had never acted like most new species. Instead of showing off their ships, they kept quiet. Instead of reaching out, they kept to themselves. Some called them mysterious. Others thought them backward. A few believed they were secretly advanced, hiding their true strength. But all of it was just rumor. The galaxy knew almost nothing for certain about humanity. And now, for some reason, that secretive, quiet species had answered Kalis's call. Chancellor Malin stayed by the tactical screen all night. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat. He just watched, waiting for anything, any change, any sign. Around him, technicians dozed in chairs, curled under blankets, trying to rest before the end. Riva stayed too, scribbling notes, reading logs, anything to keep busy. She caught Malin's gaze once. "What if they really come?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. He wanted to believe. But he had seen too much to risk it. The morning came with more fire. Another district fell. The Zorain were advancing, on foot now, confident that no resistance remained. Loudspeakers echoed through the streets in the Zorain language, offering surrender in exchange for survival. But no one listened. The Kalisians would not give up their home, not until there was nothing left to fight for. And then it happened. A single tone echoed from the sensor room, a sharp alarm that no one had heard in days. One of the technicians jolted awake, eyes wide. "Unidentified signals," she said, her voice shaking. "Multiple ships. Entering the system." Everyone in the bunker stood. The room went silent. "Zorain reinforcements?" Ayla asked, her hand instinctively moving to her weapon. The technician shook her head. "No. Unknown design. Different energy profiles. They're coming in from behind the Zorain fleet." Malin's voice was low but steady. "Put it on the screen." What appeared was not what anyone expected. Dozens, no, hundreds of ships emerged from hyperspace. Sleek, angular, and glowing with soft blue engines, they formed into patterns unlike any seen before in the galaxy. Not rigid rows, not classic formations, something more fluid, more alive. They moved like a dance, a precise, practiced motion that made no sense, and yet looked unstoppable. Then, the screen flickered. A face returned. Admiral Thorne again, her expression just as calm as before. "We have arrived," she said. "Begin civilian sheltering protocols. We will handle the rest." Without another word, the message cut off. On the sensors, the human fleet split into smaller groups and began to move toward the Zorain. The enemy fleet, caught off guard, started to shift defensively. They hadn't even had time to issue a warning. Then, as the Kalisians watched, the first Zorain ship exploded. Just like that. No long battle, no drawn-out struggle. One moment it was there, and the next it was a cloud of burning debris. Riva gasped. Malin gripped the edge of the table. "Is this real?" he whispered. Another Zorain ship vanished. Then a third. No one on Kalis had ever seen war like this, so fast, so precise. The humans weren't just stronger. They were smarter. They were surgical. They knew exactly where to strike, and they struck without mercy. For the first time since the war had begun, the Zorain hesitated, and for the first time in weeks the people of Kalis looked up, not in fear, but in awe. The Kalisians had expected noise, loud, heroic music, or grand speeches declaring justice. Instead, the humans came in silence. Their ships didn't glow brightly or thunder into the system with flashy weapon fire. They just appeared, one after another, hundreds of them, emerging from faster-than-light travel like whispers through the void. No warnings, no banners, just a sudden shift in the stars. In the command bunker beneath the capital, Chancellor Malin Darrow and his team stared in disbelief at the tactical display. Blue symbols representing the human fleet flooded the screen. The Zorain vessels marked in red were still far more massive, towering dreadships that had terrorized systems for centuries. But now, for the first time, the Red was outnumbered. "Commander," Ayla Tross leaned closer, her brow furrowed. "Where did they come from? There were no warp signatures in our outer sensors." "They must have masked their jump points," replied one of the technicians. "Or maybe they've developed a new type of drive. I don't know. Nothing about this fits the usual data." Malin said nothing. His eyes were locked on the formation the human ships were taking. It didn't look like anything he'd seen before. There were no rows, no ranks, no obvious command vessels leading the way. It was like watching a school of fish in deep water, moving together, always, changing, always adjusting. The motion was eerie, beautiful even, but underneath it there was something else. Purpose. Precision. Then Admiral Naya Thorne returned to the screen. Her calm face filled the room again. "Chancellor Darrow," she said, "we are in position and are beginning engagement. Please, advise all civilians to remain sheltered. This will be resolved quickly." Before Malin could respond, the feed shifted to an open broadcast, one aimed at both Kalis and the enemy. The Admiral's tone changed, firm, cold, absolute. "To the fleet of the Zorain Dominion, you are currently involved in the attempted extermination of a sovereign and peaceful civilization. You will cease all hostilities immediately. Power down your weapons. Withdraw your ground forces. You have 5 minutes to comply. This is your only warning." The silence in the bunker was heavy. First Advisor Seelan looked to Malin, whispering, "They can't expect the Zorain to surrender. No one ever has. They always fight." The Zorain, true to form, responded with arrogance. A deep, guttural voice came through the channel, translated into Kalesian. "This is War Commander Jarvox of the Zorain High Fleet. Your interference is a violation of galactic order. You will be destroyed alongside these pitiful insects. Prepare yourselves." The feed cut out. No one in the bunker moved. The seconds ticked by. Then it began. The human fleet launched like a single living organism. Ships that were barely 1/10 the size of the Zorain dreadnoughts darted forward with terrifying speed. They moved too fast for standard sensors to track properly, slipping between energy fields, cutting through electronic jamming like it wasn't there. Within moments, the first Zorain ship exploded in a flash of blue light and burning metal. Gasps echoed through the command room. One by one, Zorain ships began to fall. The human vessels didn't overpower their enemies through brute strength. They simply outmaneuvered them. It was like watching a master swordsman disarm an armored brute with a dozen tiny cuts. Their weapons struck with shocking accuracy, targeting engines, shields, weapons arrays. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Seelan's voice was hushed. "They're not just advanced. They're trained for this. This is what they do." Riva Solin's eyes were wide. "They've done this before," she murmured. "Maybe not here, but somewhere. Many times." The Zorain fired back, of course. Their massive guns lit up space with deadly beams and plasma bolts. But the humans never stood still. Their ships spun, shifted, and vanished from targeting systems before reappearing somewhere new. They didn't fight like any known species. They didn't fight by the book. They fought to win. Outside, on the surface, the Kalesian people heard the distant booms of high-atmosphere blasts. Some cried. Others whispered prayers. Most simply stood in stunned silence, watching the sky light up as their greatest enemy was torn apart above them. In orbit, the pride of the Zorain fleet, a massive battlecruiser known as Crimson Honor, turned to flee. It didn't get far. 3. Human ships flanked it like hunting dogs circling a wounded beast. They didn't destroy it immediately. Instead, they struck piece by piece, cutting out its engines, disabling its shields, stripping away its pride before finishing it with a final clean hit. Back in the bunker, Malin felt something deep inside him shift, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Not fear, not relief. Respect. Humanity had come, not to bargain or posture, but to protect. and they were doing it with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any speech. Within 2 hours the battle was done. The surviving Zorane ships turned tail and jumped into faster-than-light escape. Their once invincible fleet now looked scattered and broken. On the surface, ground troops dropped their weapons and surrendered en masse, unable to contact their leadership, unwilling to face orbital fire. There was no doubt left. The humans had not just won, they had dominated. As the news spread across Kalis, disbelief turned into cheers, then tears. Families embraced, soldiers fell to their knees. For the first time since the war began, Kalis was quiet again, except for the soft sound of weeping and whispered thanks. Humanity had arrived like ghosts from the stars, silent, unexpected, and unstoppable. And in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy of something long forgotten. Even the quietest force can shake the universe. The smoke still clung to the edges of Kalis's ruined skyline, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't growing thicker. The skies above the capital were quiet. No more explosions, no more streaks of fire from the heavens, only a wide expanse filled with the distant shapes of Earth's ships, holding their position in a silent watch. On the ground, Kalesians emerged from shelters and bunkers, blinking, in the pale light of a sun that had been hidden for too long. Many didn't speak. They simply looked up, trying to understand what had just happened. The impossible had become real. Chancellor Malin Darrow stood outside the battered government complex, his long coat flapping in the breeze, ash settling lightly on his shoulders. Around him, aides and officers waited in silence. A small shuttle was descending, its sleek black frame cutting through the air with grace and purpose. It touched down with a soft hiss. The hatch opened, and from it stepped Admiral Naya Thorne. She wasn't what many had expected. There were no shining medals, no army of guards. She wore a plain dark uniform marked only with the bare symbols of her rank. She was shorter than Malin had imagined and walked without dramatic flair. But every step she took seemed measured, calm, and confident. She was a soldier who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. Malin stepped forward and extended his hand. "Admiral Thorne," he said, voice heavy with emotion. "You saved us. There aren't words enough to thank you." The Admiral nodded respectfully. "I'm glad we arrived in time," she said. "We don't come for thanks. We came because it was the right thing to do." That simple sentence struck Malin harder than any speech. So many others had turned their backs on Kalis, hiding behind excuses and silence. Earth had not, and they had asked for nothing in return. In the days that followed, Earth's support didn't stop. Medical teams moved through the cities, treating injuries the Kalesians didn't have the technology to heal. Engineering squads worked around the clock to rebuild damaged power grids, clean water systems, and emergency shelters. The speed and skill of the human crews were as impressive as their warships had been. They moved with quiet discipline, not wasting a second. There were no cameras, no announcements, just action. Everywhere the humans went, they brought something the Kalesians hadn't felt in a long time. Stability. Not just protection, but structure. Calm leadership. Reassurance. It was as if they had done this before. And the truth was, they had. Not here, not on Kalis, but somewhere. Many times. You could see it in their eyes. Riva Solon found herself drawn to the human teams. She walked with them, listened to them, asked questions. She was curious about Earth, how a species so new to the stars had developed such strength, such understanding. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the ruins of the western towers, she approached a young human officer standing watch near a supply drop. His name tag read, Lane Dax Morel. "Lieutenant," she said, hesitating. "May I ask you something?" He gave a small nod. "Sure. Your ships, your tactics, they were unlike anything we've seen. How did humanity develop all of this while staying so quiet, so distant?" Dax looked out toward the horizon for a long moment before answering. "We didn't start out united. For most of our history, we were divided. We fought ourselves. Wars, disasters, politics, we nearly wiped ourselves out more than once. But we learned, slowly, painfully. And eventually we decided that if we ever left our world, we'd do better out there. Riva frowned slightly. So you expected conflict in the galaxy? He smiled sadly. We hoped for peace. But we prepared for the worst. It's what we do. We survive first. Then we try to build something better. Back in orbit, diplomatic channels lit up across the galaxy. The news of Zorane's defeat spread fast. Species that had once bowed to the Dominion now whispered about Earth. Some were afraid. Others were curious. All of them were paying attention. For the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted. And not because someone wanted to conquer, but because someone had refused to let an innocent world burn. A week after the last Zorane ship fled the system, a formal gathering was held in Kalis's restored central hall. The lights flickered occasionally, and the walls still bore scorch marks, but it was enough. There, Chancellor Malin and Admiral Thorne stood before the people of both worlds. Without fanfare, they signed the first agreement between Earth and Kalis, a simple, strong pact of cooperation and protection. It wasn't a military alliance. It wasn't a trade deal. It was something more basic, a promise, to stand together if the stars ever turned cold again. They called it the Starborn Pact. As the ceremony ended, people filed out quietly, still processing what had changed. Kalis was no longer alone. Earth had stepped into the light and shown that sometimes the ones who say the least are the ones who act when it matters most. Later that evening, Malin stood once more on the same platform where he had first seen Thorne's ship descend. He looked up at the sky, now filled with soft stars and patrolling human vessels. Beside him, Riva joined him. They didn't come to lead, she said. They came to help. Malin nodded. And in doing so, they've become something the galaxy didn't expect. What's that? Guardians, he said quietly. Not rulers, not conquerors, just guardians of something better. Far away in a Zorane war chamber, silence reigned. Their leaders listened to the reports. They didn't just lose a battle. They had been warned. Earth hadn't destroyed them completely. They had let them flee, not out of mercy, but as a message. The galaxy heard it loud and clear. Humanity stands,